Shalom, hello, and welcome to the first in a new podcast series by the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, the first such series that we're doing for English speakers. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Center based in Jerusalem. Over the next few weeks, I'll be speaking with a number of politicians, writers, activists, and others about the core ideas and principles that guided Menachem Begin, and also their application today in Israel, but also perhaps more widely. And I'm talking particular over the next few weeks about the essential idea of liberal nationalism. That is, the ideas of both liberalism and nationalism, and the way that they were paired together in such a compelling way by first Zev Jabotinsky, the founder of the revisionist Zionist movement, and then by his most famous student and disciple, Menachem Begin, who would, of course, go on to become Prime Minister of Israel. And I couldn't wish for a more suitable guest with who to begin this conversation than Dan Meridor. Dan began his career in public life as Menachem Begin's cabinet secretary, and he went on to hold elected office himself over a 20-year career, beginning with his election to the Knesset in 1983 as an MK for the Likud party. He would go on to hold many important ministerial roles, including justice minister and finance minister. He was also a deputy prime minister. And no less importantly, for the purposes of this conversation, Dan is still today, I think, one of the most eloquent and consistent advocates for the Jabotinsky-Begin model of liberal nationalism. So, Dan, welcome to the Begin Center podcast.
Good to be here.
And I've had the opportunity and the privilege to learn from you over recent years. And I recall one of my earliest takeaways, one of the things you said that sort of surprised me or that I just hadn't really appreciated was that although today we think of politics in terms of left and right, which I think is maybe increasingly less relevant or misused perhaps in today's discourse, that Menachem Begin, who's seen as the first Israeli prime minister from the right, actually didn't really use that kind of language himself when talking about himself. He saw himself as a liberal nationalist or a national liberal or variation of those two things. So can you speak to that and the way in which Begin saw himself and where those ideas came from?
Yes, first about the terminology.
Yeah.
Right is President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and right was Hitler and Mussolini. Left is Tony Blair and Barack Obama, but left is Stalin and Lenin. So when you say right and left, it's such a blurred or wide range of options.
There's a
Usually,
spectrum.
you think of the opponent as the extreme edge and yourself as the inner circle. So I try not to use these terms because they are misleading. For example, these are right wing or Republican usually want a small state, not big state, because the state shouldn't get involved. In Israel, the right wing wants the state to be very much involved in forcing religion, forcing a policy. So it's really very misleading. So I'd rather not use these terms and talk on the substance. The substance is, as you rightly mentioned, what we called national liberalism or liberal nationalism. And one has to say something about this. There are two sets of values. Each of them is very important. The national value is important because people are gathered in nations all over the world, and the nations have cultures and languages, and they want rightly to develop themselves in a benevolent way, and it's legitimate, and this is the way the world is run, so to speak. We are not only individuals, members of groups, nations, and are the most basic group we belong to, whether it's the English nation or the Jewish nation or the French, whoever. So in the Jewish case, it's even more so because for many, many years, we were identified mainly by our religion. We were in diaspora. There was nothing communicating all of us with each other but religion. The same religion was kept in Yemen and in Lithuania. So it was religion that kept us together. It was an abnormal, unnatural situation. Usually a nation is more in common than just religion. The Zionist revolution, built on the revolution of enlightenment of the 18th and 19th century, said the following thing: Jews are a nation, whether they are religious or not. One can be fully Jewish and not religious. This is a novelty, something that never happened in Jewish history since diaspora. So the national value is very important. Nations deserve to have states. Woodrow Wilson, 14 points. National self-determination. We say we are a nation. If we are a religion, you can say all over the world. So the national cause in the Zionist movement was the key issue. We want to behave like a nation, be a nation, have a state like a nation. So the national values are very important. On the other edge, one needs to say the following. If you are only about nations, about the public, about the general, and not about the individual, you forget in the end of the road, in the beginning of it, the focus should be on individuals. We are all human beings. Nations create states for people, and people are the focus, the focal point. And it's very dangerous to be only on the national side, nationalistic, so to speak. You may end up on a very dangerous path and get to an awful places you can think of history of other nations. On the other side, if you think of the world only as being built of, composed of individuals, you are not realistic. People have groups and they have languages and they have cultures and they have nations. So to speak only on individuals, forget that there is a national cause, that the borders need to be defended, there's national economy, there's national culture, is wrong as well. So one speaks here of two different sets of values, the liberal values and the national values. If you like, the general value and the individual value. And it is much more difficult, but much more vital to try to merge or balance these two sets of values. This is what Zev Jabotinsky called, and following him, Menachem Begin, national liberalism or liberal nationalism, to try to join together with these two sets of values and find the right balance. It's not always easy, it's not mathematical, but you always need to think in these two terms, national liberal. So it is not a surprise that the Jabotinsky was one who said, in the beginning, God created the individual, not the nation, the individual. In fact, you read the Bible, first, God created man, or I should say today, person, man and woman, not nations, Jews, Muslims, Christians, no, men, people. And then only they gathered in nations. And the end result should be about people. So it is basic to the movement that Begin led and Jabotinsky before him, that they held these two flags very high. The national flag, to have a nation, to have a state, to build it rightly, but this state should serve individuals that are all equal and all have rights. People have rights not because the nation gave it to them. The nation has some power because people gave up some of their natural rights to the nation to decide what are the taxes that you need to pay, who defends the country, on what side of the road you drive. You need someone to decide. So you elect a government for this. And the government, but it's not that the government can do whatever they like. They have a limited power, important but limited. There are things that they can't touch. In the American Declaration of Independence language, I would call them inalienable rights. You can't take it from me. I am equal to you. You can't make me lower, less important than you, or having less rights than you. You can't tell me that I'm not allowed to criticize the government, that I'm not allowed to believe or not to believe in that religion or that religion. I can move, I can do everything, but in the limited cases, you have a right in the government, the nation, to limit me. So this is the basic balance that should be kept. And I have to say, it's easier in populistic terms to run with one flag very high, and we can be very enthusiastic about it. Freedom, liberté, the French Revolution. We are all free, but I'm free not to give you anything to eat, even if you starve. And this is not the freedom I want. I want you to have some responsibility towards me because I have nothing to eat and you have too much. So there comes fraternity, so to speak, fraternité, or equality. If all are equal in the communist regime, there's no liberty. So it's again the combination or the merger, or if you like, the balancing act between liberté, égalité, fraternité that gives you the right regime or the right philosophy of life. This was the Likud party, before it the Herut party of Menachem Begin, and the Revisionist party, and the Beitar movement, the youth movement. It's about the merger of these two elements. For this, one needs to see mechanisms that may empower it or allow it to operate. One of them is the balancing act in government, that not all the powers is in the hand of the majority elected leader, whether he's the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, or Prime Minister of Britain. You have balancing powers in the hands of the parliament versus government, the cabinet, and most importantly, the judiciary. And judiciary is unique in that does not need the public support. It does not go for election. It needs to try and judge by the merits, on the basic values of the society. And then they will not acquit you because people love you. They will not convict you because people hate you. They don't care about public opinion. So you need somebody to stand for the individual or for the minority group against the power of majority, because majority can be corrupted, not only in corruption, in the regular term corruption, but corrupt in the sense of using power against minorities. I'm gay and you are straight, and I'm a minority and I'm not. But for the sake of argument, you can say I don't care about gays and they would not want to fight. Or I'm black and you are white, or I'm a Christian and you are Muslim. One needs to have some balancing act in the institutions, which is why the Herut party and the Likud party were the great defenders of the Supreme Court and the court system, saying, yes, it sounds strange. The court not elected by the people, and they do not have to answer the people why do this and that, but they are the very vital balancing power to the power of the majority. But the majority cannot do whatever they like to me. So the quarrel about the power of the institutions, the infighting between them, so to speak, is part of democracy. But the need to defend the Supreme Court and the system, the legal system, because of the values it defends, is crucial to understand the liberal national value system. I have to say, a court is not guaranteed to anything if the court goes with majority and not with the basic values of democracy. Take the American court from the creation of the United States in 1776, 90 years later until Lincoln, black people didn't vote and the court didn't care. Until
Right.
1920, the women didn't vote, the court didn't care. So if the court stands with the majority and not with the basic value of democracy, of freedom and equality, we don't have this function operating efficiently in democracy. So this
Right.
is the basic philosophical lookout, or Weltanschauung in good German, of the liberal national movement.
Okay, so there's a lot there for me to pick on. I could pick a few things
Okay.
to build on, but let me take this. So on that last point where you talked about the American case and how until the Civil War and the emancipation of the slaves, the court was effectively not living up to the values of of America's own Declaration of Independence. America was
Unless
founded on particular values.
that is true, but you may say, or might have said, we stick to the declaration. When we said all men are created equal, we didn't say women. And
Interesting.
men and blacks are not men, they're something else. So if you interpret in the wrong way,
Right.
you will say something very different from the basic understanding of democracy.
Right. So maybe there's something there about the way nations and societies evolve, and the
Yeah.
way that and so that the values change
Yeah.
over time. But I wonder, in recent years, I found myself in debates around Zionism with people outside Israel who either sometimes for genuinely malicious reasons, but also more often just out of ignorance, don't really understand what Zionism is. And Zionism has unfortunately become a dirty word in many circles outside of Israel, especially on the sort of progressive side of politics in academia and elsewhere. And my argument has always been that if they actually read, say, Alt Neuland by Herzl and see the type of society that Herzl envisaged, or they read Jabotinsky, or they read Israel's Declaration of Independence, whose principal author was Ben Gurion, then they can see that across a range of Zionist thinkers, the intention was to create as a nation, yes, a nation state, a Jewish nation state, but a liberal democratic Jewish nation state. So would you go so far as to say that Zionism, or let's say Zionism in the way it was initially thought of, was inherently liberal nationalist?
It's a very important point, not only philosophically, but today even politically, because it really became a debated issue, not to say more than that. For me, Zionism is a very clear and nice example of democratic nation building. Let me say the following to illustrate what I mean. The Zionist movement said the Jews are a nation, like other nations, and they deserve a state. And the land that they aspire to get is the land from which they were expelled 2,000 or 2,500 years ago. The story is known. So we said we have a right to come because we have a need. We don't have a land, and we need one because you see what happened to us all over the world in diaspora. And we deserve one, and we deserve this one because this is where we expect from, right? This is the right. We have a right. But this was never sufficient. There was always an additional demand that was made by the Zionist movement of all its aspects. We want a Jewish majority. The Arabs objected to Jewish majority. And the British played with the white papers to limit the aliyah, the immigration to Palestine, because they knew that the Jews want a majority, because they want to have a state. The Arabs don't want a Jewish majority because they're against the state. But ask yourself, why did Zionist leaders demand majority? For one basic reason, it was clear that the Arabs vote as well.
Yeah.
If they're only the Jews, a racist approach, like the South African approach before Mandela, before the revolution in South Africa, they did majority. You can rule by divine right, by historic right, by national, international law right. But no, they always said we need majority because it was clear, it was inherent to Zionism in,
Yeah.
I would say, all of its streams, maybe not the Messianic stream, which is very minimal and outside the central thinking, that we will have an equal rights state to all, whether they are Arabs or Jews, whether they are men or women, it's going to be equal. Equality was basic to Zionism.
Yeah.
So if you say, yeah, but they didn't want, the Arabs didn't want it, why do you come and take their land? A different argument, right? They didn't want it. But if we come to the conclusion, as I have come to, and the Zionists pleaded all the time, the Jews deserve to have a state somewhere. There is no place on earth that is empty of people. Wherever you go, people who are now the majority would object to become a minority. So it was inherent that there will be objection, there will be antagonistic approach to the Zionist idea. So if that makes it immoral, that means morality means everybody will have a nation, but the Jews will not have it.
Yeah.
This is immoral to me. And between the two evils, if you like, or the two options, that the Arabs who have so many lands, in one part there will not be a majority, but a minority with equal rights, or that the Jews will have no land at all, I think it's clearly, objectively, from the point of view of justice, that we deserve to have a state and we have a just cause of Zionism. To have a state, in spite of the Arab objection, provided that we accord them full equality and rights like we have. And in fact, Israel was established this way. You mentioned the Declaration of Independence, speaking of full equality of all Arabs and Jews and freedom to all. This was how the state was established, and we gave immediately Israeli citizenship to all, whether they are Jews or Arabs, who were under the jurisdiction of the Israeli state and the Israeli army after the War of Independence. Nobody thought that we can run it because it's a Jewish state in one sense, then you can run it only by the Jews. No. Let me say something of the term Jewish state. By the way, this term was given to us by the United Nations. In 1947, the decision, the resolution to partition Palestine to two states they say in the 1947, November 1929, that there should be a Jewish state and an Arab state. By the
Yeah.
way, not Jewish and Muslim. It's not a religious connotation. It's a
Right.
national connotation, Jews and Arabs.
Yeah.
And this is where the Jewish state comes from. It comes from another source that I mentioned earlier. Who has a right of self-determination? Not you, Paul, not me, Dan. Nations have it. And if they have a right of self-determination, it's the state of the Germans in Germany, although people who are not Germans may live there. The state of Hungary is Hungary. The people of Hungary have a right there, but they have some minorities in it. So the
Yeah.
fact that there are nation states, and we are not speaking of racist purism, God forbid, means that we will have a majority and minority. And majority has the right of self-determination. What can he do with it? It's a good question. Because I'm the majority, can I do everything? No, there are things I can do. For example, because of where you came from, you know the Union Jack. Union Jack has a cross on it, although
Yeah.
Jews and Muslims live in Britain
Yeah.
or in Switzerland or in the Baltic states or in the Scandinavian states. Yeah, the majority has a right to have its expression, like on the flag, all right? But it does not mean the Muslim in Britain is entitled to less than the Christian or the Jew. So
Yeah.
there's no contradiction between being a nation state of one nation and have minorities with full rights in that state. So this is the case of Zionism. It's a nation state of the Jewish people, but it has full rights and full equal rights to all the citizens who live in it. No preference to a Jew over the Arab or the Druze or Christian or Muslim, whatever. This is basic, and this is why it's a moral issue. We have the moral high ground when we do this. If we want, and I don't want to go to politics now, to create
No.
a situation where we control the whole land and the Arabs with all sorts of tricks will not vote, this is not Zionism. This is racism. And
Right.
we should not go there.
Right. And of course because because the founders of the state of Israel did found it as a liberal democratic state, they, as it turned out, because of the way the Middle East developed in other parts of the Middle East, you ended up with the Arabs in Israel having more rights in most cases than they have where in the countries in which they are majorities, just because
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
how the
Again,
Arab states developed as dictatorships or monarchies or
no,
other
no
things.
democracy, no
Yeah,
real democracy.
yeah,
Yeah, okay, modern, when you say, you see, you mentioned the founding fathers or the thinkers or the visionaries of
yeah,
Zionism, and you mentioned the Alt Neuland of Herzl.
yeah,
In Jabotinsky, in the very famous article written 102 years ago, The Iron Wall, he says, I swear in the name of our grandchildren, will never violate equality of human rights of the
right,
Arabs. They will be fully equal. This is in the beginning of Zionist development. It was given by a man who is called, as you said, the right wing or the hawk, the tough guy. But he said, yes, I'm tough because I want to get a land. But once I have a land, I guarantee you, the Arabs, you have full equality, where there will not be, he even says, I can envisage a situation where there is an Arab prime minister and Jewish deputy prime minister. There's no gap whatsoever. So this was basic for all, practically all. I can't speak for all people all over the world, but most Zionist leaders, the vast majority, spoke in terms of full equality and democracy in its true sense, not formal democracy. And
right,
this was part of Zionism. And the Arabs in Israel are really fully equal now. They vote like I vote or you vote, and they have the same rights as I have. I can't say there's no tension when there is a fight or a battle or even a war going on between the Jewish state and Arab state, so Arab terrorist organization. I can understand that some Arabs who are full Israelis feel some tension within themselves. It's my people against my country. Where do I stand? I'm not saying it's easy. It needs to be dealt with sensitivity and with wisdom, but basically it's the same rights, and they have the same rights as we have. And this is what how Israel developed. By the way, recently, some 3, 4 years ago, a Supreme Court judge uh, wrote in one of his decisions that he considers the Declaration of Independence as the founding document, even above constitution. So if there is in the Declaration of Independence the statement of full equality, no law, even constitutional law, cannot do anything against it, cannot degrade it, cannot take away those basic rights. The state was built as a equal rights state to all citizens in it. There's one thing the Jews and Arabs are not, but not Israeli Jews. People in diaspora outside Israel, like all countries, don't have a right to go wherever they like in the world. You want to go to America, you need to get a visa, you need to get a license, or to bring to any kind. People control the immigration. But as it was built as a Jewish state, we say Jews in the world have a right to come to Israel and then become equal citizens with all the Arabs there. But they have this right, and people who are not Jews don't have this natural right, the right to return to the home, the historic home. And this happens, by the way, in some other countries as well that see themselves as a national home of a
Mm.
certain nation.
Yeah.
So, but once he is here or she is here, they are fully equal to the others, Arabs or Jews. I give the following metaphor that I use when I talk to Jews around the world. The shareholders of this company called the State of Israel are held by the citizens of Israel, Jews and Arabs, and they vote and decide what happens. You Jews in diaspora, you're option holders.
Yeah.
You have an option to become citizens. That's why you are interested in our country. You deserve to get responses from us to what you ask because you have an interest. You have a key. You have something in you that gives you an option. But as long as you are there, you can't decide here. You can advise us. We don't. You are not part of the shareholders. You are the
Right.
option holders.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because a writer that I like once said that the state of Israel, he was making the point that Israel is both Jewish and democratic, and he talked about how Israel is the state of the Jewish people, whether they live in Israel or not, and the state of all its citizens, whether they are Jewish or not, which I like, except that what you say is right, of course, which is that actually, in terms of actual civil rights in Israel, non Jewish citizens of Israel have more rights than Jews outside Israel who are not citizens, right? But
Of
Jews outside
course.
Israel cannot vote here, for example, in elections, whereas Arab citizens of Israel can. And
Definitely,
that's
you see that some people in our midst uh, treat us as if we built another Jewish community. The Jewish
yes,
community it was in Europe, it was mainly destroyed and killed by the Germans. There's a Jewish community in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, in London, in Golders Green, and there would be a Jewish community. No, we didn't build another community. We built a state where Jews are majority, but not the only citizens. We didn't build a Jewish state in the sense that it's all Jews. No, it's not a Jewish community. There is a huge Jewish community here, but the state's not a Jewish community. It's a state, and it's a democratic state. We moved from the area of Jewish communities, which has its own rules and ways of behavior all over the world for all the years of diaspora,
yeah,
to a democratic state. And now, in terms of state, we need to act with full equality and full rights to all the citizens.
right. And because I know that some of our listeners will be less well versed in Israeli history and politics than others, I want to just clarify that when we're talking about these Arab citizens, we are talking about very specifically about the 20% of Israel that are citizens, the Arab citizens of Israel. We're not talking about the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, or Gaza, of course. We're talking about those living within pre-1967 Israel within the Green Line. Just to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
that.
it's good that you've said it. Not everybody may know it, but I want
Right.
to stress something here, and this is really a cause of some anxiety and problem. Yes, since 1967, the Six Days War, we do control militarily the areas that you mentioned, Judea, Samaria, to some extent Gaza, but Gaza is now
Yeah.
in consummation. I don't know how it's going to end. And
Right. That's a complicated one. Yeah.
yeah, we will hopefully. But in any
Yeah.
case, in Judea and Samaria, we never applied our law. I leave Jerusalem aside for a minute. But Judea and
Yeah.
Samaria, or the West Bank of Jordan, as it used to be known, was first occupied by Jordan in 1950, and then occupied by us in the Six Days War. And it's under Israeli control. It's not part of Israel. Israeli law does not apply there. Uh, it's inhabited by, I would say, 80 or 90% of Arabs and 10 or 20% of Jews who live there, but they don't live in Israel legally. They have obligations, so forth, and this creates some confusion because there is no border with fences that you need to cross. It's quite easy to come and go, and some people don't see all of it as one state. If all of it is one state, we're not a democracy. But it's not one state. It's a temporary situation.
Sorry, just to clarify, because the Arabs living there, the Palestinians living there, don't have the vote.
Yeah, don't have voting rights. They are not Israeli citizens. Not only
Right.
voting in every other man. Not only
Right.
voting definitely, but they don't have the rights that I have, or the Israeli Arab. An Arab living in Nazareth, or in Jaffa, or in Haifa has rights as Paul Gross has, as Dan Meridon has. Arab living in Hebron or Bethlehem doesn't have it because he does not want to be part of Israel, and he's not part of Israel. We never annexed it. It's an abnormal situation.
Yeah.
Takes too long. Nobody thought it would take that long. All attempts to resolve it have failed, both by force or by agreement. I myself have been present and participant in the attempt at Camp David 25 years ago, where Barack, our prime minister, with me and other people, and the President Clinton and Arafat sat together for 2 weeks trying to resolve it. In the end, we were not able to resolve it. And Clinton then said something in the lines, I think Tom Friedman quotes it, if it was 67 that the problem was, we would help you, Mr. Arafat. But if it's 48, and to undo Israel, we won't help you. And it was 48. Then Olmert, a very dovish or forthcoming Israeli prime minister, very courageously attempted to reach an agreement with Abu Mazen in 2008. And he offered almost everything: Palestinian state, end of occupation, part of Jerusalem, whatnot, but not the right to return. That's not 48 to send the Arabs when they have a state to live in our state. And this too was not resolved. So Israel was not always the government today. We were very, what people call dovish governments, or serious governments, or daring governments who tried very hard to get an agreement. There was no agreement. So the fact that we don't have an agreement, I don't put the blame on the Israeli government. It is not entirely on the Israeli government. There were some governments who tried sincerely, seriously, taking political risk, and there was no positive response from the other side. So this is a fact, but what we have is anomaly, and the tragedy may be that some people want to normalize this anomaly as if we can live like this together forever. It's wrong. If in the end we have one state from the Jordan to the sea, it will not be a Jewish state, or it will be a Jewish state with no equality, which to me is not democratic, not Jewish. Let me say something about the Jewish side of it, not the democratic side. We were minorities in diaspora since we were expelled from our homeland so many years ago. We were minorities all over the world, treated well or less than well, or even persecuted, and all the way down to the Holocaust. But we Jews were very prominent in all the movements of human rights that developed in the 19th century, the Spring of Nations. Jews were very, very involved in the human rights and minority rights revolution for the blacks in America, in South Africa. But it's not surprising because Jews are minorities, so they acted to minorities' rights. Now here's the test. For the first time, after so many years of exile, we are the majority. We have a land. How do we Jewishly treat the minorities among us? Do we treat them as we were treated, with no equal rights? Is that Jewish? Is that the Jewish moral lesson that we learned from the past? So it's not only non-democratic to treat them non-equally, it's non-Jewish. It's a shame in a way. In the end, we need a situation where all of us are equal as we were wanted to be treated, and not always treated in many countries all over the world. So the test is when you are strong, and we are the majority, not when we are the minority. And thank God, or thank our soldiers and our visionaries and our politicians, we have a state, and we are the majority. Let's do it right.
Yeah. It's all, I mean, to go even further back, there's also a Jewish biblical injunction to care for the stranger, not to oppress the stranger. I want you mentioned you mentioned that the peace negotiations that you were part of and the failures of those ultimate failures of those negotiations, and you talked about the Clinton's comment that Arafat was Arafat was trying to undo 48 rather than 67, right? Rather than trying to undo the Israeli control of the West Bank and Gaza, he was trying to somehow undo Israel itself. And there I think we get to the national side of the national liberal equation, meaning that yes, we want to have a liberal democratic country with equal rights that you very eloquently and I think compellingly advocated for. But we do want to have a Jewish nation state. We don't want to give up on that. We don't want to have some sort of amorphous, state, that democratic state for all, in which the Jewish character is completely lost, which is effectively what those are advocating for, a full right of return of all the descendants of Palestinian refugees into what is now Israel. That's what would result in that.
Yes, you see, this is again, I want to say when we say we want to have a Jewish state, I again stress it's Jewish in the national way, the cultural way. Does not mean religious state. Religions don't deserve states. States should not interfere with religion. Israel, in the Declaration of Independence, promises freedom of religion. You can be totally observant or totally secular. You can be a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew. You're a full citizen. The state is Jewish state because it's the Jewish people, not in the religious way, but in the national sense of the word. Then you are right, and when you say that if you have the right of return or the claim to return to where the grandparents were before 48, what do we have here? Let me take it from the human point of view. I can understand that somebody who had a home in Ashkelon or in Haifa and lost it in the war has some feelings or emotions or even a dream to come. All right, I understand. Here's the conflict or the tragedy and the resolution. I look at the land of Israel as all mine. I don't feel that Hebron is less mine than Haifa. I don't feel at Beit El that I'm a stranger more than in Nazareth. No, and I guarantee that the other side of many people there feel the same thing. For them, the whole land is theirs. They think Hebron and Haifa is theirs. Let's take it as a basic assumption. I think it can be the case because everybody, now we ask for a solution. We can't live together because you see what happened when we live together. So the solution was partition, in which I give up part of my rights or part of the land that I aspire to have, and I create a state where the Jews are a vast majority, state of Israel. And you Arabs have to give up, as I did, part of what you dreamt you will have, and have an Arab state there. You may have Jewish minorities. Jews would like to live there. I have Arab minorities. But this is basically an Arab state. This is a Jewish state. It's painful to me to give up, say, historic places like Bethlehem or Hebron, where the border will go. It's painful. I'm not playing it. I dreamt of it. I thought this is our land. But I understand that it's not only aspirations and history and emotions. There is reality, and there are people there. Yes, in Bethlehem, King David was born. In Bethlehem, you speak of Ruth the Moabite and Rachel. Yes, but there is Fatma and Saidu living there today as well. You can't overlook the past, but you can't overlook the present. And if we come with the idea, which is the general perception of the world, that the way to resolve it is by a division or partition of the land to two states, this means that you, Arab, and I, the Jew, have to agree that all our aspirations and hopes will be concentrated in the part that is mine, not the part that is yours. Arabs will not be in exile. They will be in Ramallah, not in Ramleh. And if they move their apartments, it's in the same land. And Jews who will not live in Nablus, they will live in Tel Aviv. So this is not a tragedy. It's painful. I can understand it because of families, memories. But if you want a solution, if the solution is partition, you have to give up the idea that once you have a state and I have a state, you have a right to move all your people from your state to my state, because then the whole logic of partition is lost.
Right. Yeah. Just staying on the nationalism point. So in English, you have this one word, nationalism, and in Hebrew, I think more usefully, you have two words. You have little miut and little munut,
Right.
which have very different connotations. So for our non-Hebrew speaking listeners, you'll probably explain it much better than me, but I would just effectively say that little miut is nationalism in the basic sense that we've been talking about, of national identity, of feeling an attachment to your people, to your land, to your language, to your national culture. And little manut has a much more negative connotation of a sort of chauvinism, of an insularity, of a we our nation's better than your nation, that and potentially an aggression that comes with that. The negative nationalism that we think of when we think of 1930s Europe, for example. And I think today, nationalism is often a dirty word. And one of the problems we have for people like yourself and me who are trying to push this idea of liberal nationalism, that some of the loudest and strongest voices that are arguing for the nation state are not necessarily the most liberal voices.
You're right. I would say the following. If you want to strike a line between the Hebrew words le'umiyut and le'umanut, or nationalism or extreme nationalism, or that the one is about equality, the other is about superiority.
Mm,
I don't demand to have any more right than any other nation. I'm another nation, like the Congolese, or like the Canadians, or like the Brazilians, or like Arabs, whoever they are. I'm not superior to them.
mm.
I too have a right, like others. When
Do you ever
people
since we
think,
talked about nations as like different instruments in an orchestra, right?
yeah, yeah, but we're all equal in that sense. Not one, no one is superior to the other.
Right.
In the word leumanut, extreme nationalism, I think there is a sense of we have more rights, we are more than you.
Supremacy.
Supremacy. When you hear this ugly phenomenon of white supremacists in America or
Mm,
Jewish supremacists here, this to me is awful. This is something I cannot stand. I cannot listen to. This is the basic tenets of democracy cannot contain it. We are all equal. What Zionism demanded is equality among other nations, not superiority among others. So
mm,
this is one aspect I would stress when I compare uh, good nationalism to bad nationalism or extreme nationalism. Yes, today it's true that because in all in democratic nation states, like many states in Europe, there was always a balance, or there was an attempt to have a balance between full equality and human rights to everybody, but the national character, like the language, the Dutch language in Holland, and the French language in France, and the German language in Germany, and so forth. There was a balance, and today people who don't want real democracy stress the national side alone. Take Mr. Orban with his illiberal democracy,
mm,
taking nationalism not as a positive value, which I think it is, but as
mm,
a negative value against the minorities, against the individuals, against the human rights. And this is, it sometimes works because nationalism is a very strong feeling in people. You say, it's our nation, we are threatened by this dirty guy, but this dirty group, this rapist, it's easy to depict the other as a big threat and ugly and immoral and a criminal. And I don't want to mention names of big leaders who say today on people in their country. Unfortunately, it works because of human nature, because you want to you coalesce with your kind and you want to stand together. The group stands together against threats from outside. If you augment artificially the threats from outside, you speak of nationalism. Our nations is threatened by the others, and there is this xenophobia, the hate of the others that develops from it. It
mm,
works politically. It's very dangerous. Again, it goes back to what we said earlier. You need always to balance the national cause and the individual cause, the individual rights. Yes, I am for a national cause. I want to teach my children the Hebrew language and the Hebrew literature and the Bible, not only as a religious text, but as a historic and cultural, literary text. And I want them to know and care about the Jewish people. I don't want them to do it at the expense of the basic human and equal rights to all others. And this
yeah,
is the balancing act that I spoke of earlier, which is less easily sellable to people. People buy easier, tough, clear one item and flag. It's wrong. We all speak about the balance of the national cause and the liberal cause or the democratic cause, or if you like, the balance between the individual and the public. In the end, it's about people. Everyone is a whole world. Everyone has a right by nature, by God, by whatever, not by the country. And we need to treat them with respect and equally. And this needs to be remembered all the time. And it's about leadership. If leadership teaches to go that way, people will go that way. Some will go, many will go. If people use the basic instincts of survival and create or augment dangers from outside, it may end up in the very extreme edge of nationalism in the very wrong and very ugly sense.
Mm. And I think in one of the reasons why I think the liberal national idea isn't just a compelling one, but also a potentially very useful one today is that the whilst you have the extreme nationalists that we're talking about, that you've referred to, a lot of the debate in Europe, I think, is also fueled by that, let's say liberals, and I'm liberal in the broad sense. I'm not talking about the like the kind of American definition, like the kind of left wing definition of liberal in the
Yeah,
American context, but the broad sense of liberal that I think we're talking about, classical liberalism, philosophical liberalism, that liberals who are maybe not paying enough attention to the importance of national feeling and national identity. So there's a great quote by the American by David Frum, who used to work with Bush, with George
yeah,
Bush, who said, I think he said something like, if Democrats, small d, not necessarily the Democratic Party, but if Democrats don't defend our borders, then people will turn to the fascists to defend our borders. As in,
yeah,
if
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's exactly this. Yeah,
if it's felt that the mainstream politicians of left or right are
yeah,
not are just are letting everyone in and accusing anyone who puts up any kind of protest about untraveled immigration and says, oh, you're a racist, you're a fascist, then people might start voting for the actual fascists, who are the only people who are actually saying, we need to stop immigration. We need to stop these foreigners coming in. And I think that's also something that's happening in Europe.
yeah. I think in Europe and in America to an extent,
Right.
Mexican border, and this was a danger people should have paid attention to, and some didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, in the ideal liberal world, when there's no nations, why shouldn't I allow somebody to move from point A to point B? Because I put a border and soldiers, he wants to live here. It's nicer life, better quality, and I want to move from this state to that state.
Hmm.
But this, if it's in minimum numbers, who cares? We don't believe in racism. People who want to live here can be of whatever color and so forth. But if in the end it threatens the national character, the national, the common language, the
Hmm.
heritage, because people merge with each other until you see no border, then people don't like it. People want to live among people with the culture that they know, the language that they speak, and they want to live together, and they can allow a number of non original people, non-domestic people come from, yeah, to a certain number. And there are problems of refugees, and one needs to help refugees, but all needs to be balanced. In the end, it's the word balance that I spoke of earlier between nationalism and liberalism, between free immigration and no immigration at all. And if one sees the balance is not kept in a reasonable way, and the borders are fully open to everybody,
Hmm.
and some people see that themselves threatened by the fact that in their own neighborhood, the language spoken is not the language that they and their parents and grandparents spoke with, or the
Right.
values are very different. They feel threatened. Now, even if it's not big numbers, it's very easy to paint it in very dark colors and then to incite against it. And
Yeah.
this is what we see in some parts. In Europe, for example, the Schengen agreement that you all can move from each country to any country you like has a lot of benefits in it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a situation where people think that their own culture is threatened, I think Brexit was one point. People maybe wrongly thought that
Yeah.
British spirit is threatened now by immigration. devoted to something. I don't want to go into that, but this is what you're speaking of.
Yeah,
Immigration is rightly and should rightly be controlled. I don't say no immigration. That's not the world we live in. We live in a global world, and there is movement, and some people move, and it's fine. But there should be enough attention paid to the culture of the country and the language of the country and the heritage of the country. And as you mentioned, I think Jabotinsky about the orchestra, it's much more richer sound if you have both a trumpet and a violin and a viola and a trumpet and everything else. Then
yeah.
everybody is individual. We are not only individuals. We are individuals, but we have our own group that we belong to, or certain groups, all of us, and it's fine. It's not nothing bad in it.
Right. So let's conclude with by going back to where I started with Menachem Begin. So we talked at the beginning about left and right in terminology, and I think one of the problems people have, maybe when they look at Israel, but maybe not just in the context of Israel, is the way people make assumptions about if you're right wing, then you are this. If you're left wing, you're this. Then and they collapse together all sorts of different ideas. So in the American context, I'm sure many of our listeners will be in the United States, that if you're a conservative, then you must think this on abortion and gun control and religion and all these things. And you might not. You might be, you might think that everyone should own a gun, but also be pro-choice on abortion. And they collapse together all these different ideas. And maybe we could, as you were someone that knew Menachem Begin personally and was so profoundly influenced by him, if you can talk about the ways in which Menachem Begin, despite the fact that people see him as the first right-wing prime minister, and people make all kinds of assumptions about what right-wing means, the ways in which Menachem Begin was actually a profoundly liberal, in the classical sense of the word, liberal figure, politician, individual in the way that he did politics.
Yes, it's a good point to end the discussion with. You're right how these images are sometimes extremely misleading. For example, right wing, hawk, tough
Yeah,
guy is the man who shocked the world by making peace.
yeah.
After all the Labour Party attempts, I'm not blaming them, who never succeeded, he's the one who had this historic breakthrough of peace between Israel and the major Arab states. And the whole Middle East changed because of his determination to go there. Is that a right wing or left wing? What is it? Usually giving up
Peace
land,
agreement with Egypt.
yeah,
We're talking about the peace
gi-
agreement with
gi-
Egypt.
yeah, Israel and Egypt peace treaty of 77, 79. In today's terms, if you give up land, you're a leftist, you're a half traitor. So Menachem Begin, the hawk, the land of Israel man, all of that, he is the first man to have given up almost three times the land of Israel in terms of land of Sinai, to have an agreement with a dictator called Sadat. And people said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Yeah, this is the right policy," because he was not right wing, including hawk and wars and no peace and no human rights. No, this Menachem Begin, when he got to power in 1977, one of the first things he did was calling the head of the security services, Mr. Achituv, talking with him. He now is in charge of security services. Mr. Begin is the prime minister. And he said to him, "I forbid any use of force in interrogation. You cannot use force." And the question was, so what should I do? The wisdom of the interrogator, no force. And of all the prime ministers, he's the one who insisted, among others, that the Shin Bet, the security services, does not use force in interrogation. Who was interrogated by the Soviets when he was detained by them, dedicated the book about this to the anonymous tortured,
Right.
Unea Almuni. So
This is
he's
his book. This is his book, White Knight. White Knights in
yeah,
English.
the White Knight. So I think a man who's supposed to be right wing and tough, he's the one who said there is a law, and the law says you can't use force against people who are interrogated. You use your wisdom, also the tricks, not force, not power. When he was in the opposition still, there was in the first years of Israel military government regime over the Arab parts, the Arab population parts of Israel. and he for years fought against it. They should be equal citizens. He is the one, this man of this right wing, as they call him, who insisted and demanded a constitution in which it would be clearly said that the Supreme Court, not elected by the people, not responding to the majority, will have superiority over Knesset laws in order to defend human rights. Is that right wing or left wing? I can go on. I don't want to go too in detail. We speak to people who don't know all the details, but he was the most liberal of all Israeli prime ministers and a very tough one on security. But he was able to make his own decisions and compromises, or rather balancing act between
Mm.
these sets of values. You may agree with what he did, you may not agree, fine. Some people objected, it's politics, it's right. But the basic values were kept. We are a Jewish state in the democratic state, and it goes together. There's no contradiction. We'll do it right, and Arabs are fully equal citizens. We have a Supreme Court judges that are Arabs and Muslims and Christians, and we have, of course, members of parliament, and we had even ministers in government who are Arabs. It's an equal rights state. But we are still a state that has the Star of David on the flag, and those anthem is Hatikva, and where the Jewish people can gather or regather from diaspora, and there is no contradiction. The world is not that flat; it's more complex, and you can have national values and have a very strict human rights and equality regime. This is what Israel was all about, and needs to stay the way it was.
Thank you so much, Dan Meridor, for enlightening us and giving our listeners such a wonderful start to these longer conversations that we hope to have about liberal nationalism, and also some amazingly important and pertinent historical background as well. Dan Meridor, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul. See you again in one of those languages.